A German shepherd hobbled out of the scarlet haze of the red wind, his coat dusted with dirt and dried blood. 5 miles past the outskirts of Redstone, a corroded iron gate marked Ironwood Ranch, a name half buried by years of silence. Behind that gate, a forgotten house waited, and beyond it, hundreds of neglected dogs lingered in the desert heat. In that same dust knelt a former U.S. Marine, bound not by orders but by a promise he had never spoken aloud. No one had expected the shepherd's return. No one had even believed it possible. But he remembered, the scent of the pack, the man who chose to stay behind, and the vow that still pulsed like a heartbeat beneath the red horizon. Tell me where you're watching from, and subscribe if you believe every dog deserves a second chance. The morning over Redstone, Arizona, broke crisp and clean, the kind of dawn that made even sound seem to travel farther. The sky stretched hard and bright, a pale blue shell above the mesas. Cold wind drifted down from the Mogollon Rim, carrying the dry perfume of sage and the faint rumor of snow clinging to faraway pines. But here, in the Red Rock Basin, the sun already stung like sandpaper against paint and patience. At the edge of town, in a faded row of motel rooms called the Sundog Motor Court, Ethan Granger sat on the wooden step outside Unit 7, a chipped mug of coffee cooling between his palms. Beside him sat a German shepherd named Rex, still and alert, posted at his left knee like a statue carved from dusk and amber light. Ethan was 35, a Marine veteran who carried his strength quietly. His posture was that of a man who'd learned how to stay calm under weather, under fire, under grief. A clean jawline shadowed with stubble, shoulders squared beneath a sun-bleached flannel, and eyes that had memorized too many nights. A pale scar traced the knuckles of his right hand, a small souvenir from broken glass and saving someone just in time. People often mistook his reserve for coldness, but it wasn't. His calm came from loss that had burned away the need for show. On his left wrist, a paracord bracelet remained tied, a small, hand-woven band made by Sarah, his wife, before his last deployment. He'd never taken it off. Rex, 5 years old, stood 26 inches at the shoulder, a solid, muscular shepherd with a thick saddle of black fur and a warm tan mask. He bore a faint scar on his right forepaw, a memory of shrapnel long past, and another faint line beneath one ear where an old collar had rubbed raw. His eyes glowed with steady intelligence, the kind that assessed a room before choosing trust. Rex didn't beg for affection. He earned it and gave it back with the same quiet loyalty that soldiers understand better than anyone. He loved 3 things equally: the thrill of chasing a ball, the gravity of duty, and the small moments when Ethan finally laughed at the end of a long day. The motel's owner, Gloria Pike, shuffled past then, her orange tabby tucked lazily in one arm. She was in her late 50s, with a silver streak cutting through her coffee-brown hair like a comet trail. Short and sturdy in a denim jacket covered in national park patches, she was the type who knew both the latest gossip and whether you'd need heat tape for your pipes next week. "Coffee that color can't be trusted," she said, glancing at Ethan's cup. "You need the second pot, the decent one." Ethan smiled faintly. "Appreciate it," he said in that low, careful voice of his, the kind that didn't waste words. Gloria's smile softened. "You working the feedlot again?" "If they'll have me," Ethan replied. After that, the garage on Walnut. "Tow drivers out sick." "You'll be fine," she said, studying him with knowing eyes. "And if you're not, you will be. That's how Redstone works." Stubborn, but she shares. And she was right, stubbornness ran through Redstone like veins through stone. The town clung to its edges, rust-red mesas leaning against the sky, old mines scarring the hills like signatures of giants. The storefronts on Main still carried hand-painted signs and honest glass. Wind whistled through the alleys, tugging at winter blankets hung over balconies. A church bell started to ring, then thought better of it and fell silent again. Ethan set his mug down and reached into his duffel bag for a small leather-bound journal wrapped in an old cotton bandana. Its cover had worn to the warm brown of a saddle, its spine stitched with careful hands. Inside lived Sarah's handwriting, slender, slanted slightly left, the way she used to stand when deep in thought. Sarah Granger had been 29 when she met Ethan at a base barbecue where the music was too loud and her laughter somehow cut through it. She was 5'7", with long black hair usually tied in a practical braid, and eyes that could settle even a frightened dog. People told her the truth without meaning to. Her skin was pale olive, her voice soft but certain. She'd worked as a school counselor before Ethan's deployments, good at hearing the unsaid, at seeing the pain that didn't make it into words. A childhood passed between foster homes had taught her the sacred weight of showing up every day. Her kindness wasn't loud, but it stayed. Her wit was sharp, yet never cruel. And when she said she believed in church, she meant the kind built from second chances and kitchen tables. In the margins of her journal were sketches, small, tender things, a mutt with a torn ear, a shepherd pup too big for its paws, a cat lounging like royalty. Ethan traced her drawings, then turned to the same page he always did when the wind carried that cold ache. One day, Sarah had written, "We'll make a place where old dogs aren't a burden, and frightened ones aren't a bother. Somewhere, there is no such thing as too late." She'd underlined those last two words twice, as though she could convince time to behave. Ethan closed the book, holding it between his palms like something alive. Rex leaned closer, pressing his weight against Ethan's leg, a silent miracle of presence. "I know," Ethan whispered. It was what he always said when grief rose like weather, when all a man could do was outlast it. He stood, brushed the dust from his jeans, and whistled softly. Rex fell in at his heel as they walked toward town, where the day's work waited like another duty post. He didn't call it wandering, though that's what it looked like. It had been almost a year since Sarah's accident on that icy road. He never stayed anywhere longer than the job required. Moving forward, that's what he called it. Soldiers don't like the feeling of circling back. He worked hard, spoke little, slept light, and always left a place better than he'd found it. That evening, when the winter sun slipped down behind the mesas, he walked back toward the Sundog motor court. His shadow and Rex's stretched long beside each other, perfectly in rhythm, the quiet twinship of man and dog who'd seen too much to waste motion. When he reached the office, a cream-colored envelope waited in the wire basket by the counter, thick, formal, and out of place amid the clutter of spare keys and peppermint candies. "It came around noon," Gloria said, tapping it. "Phoenix Law Firm, McKenna and Beale." Looked too serious to ignore. Ethan turned it over. A small brass seal glinted faintly under the light, scales and torch insignia, embossed and professional. The handwriting across the front wasn't printed. Blue ink, careful loops, firm strokes, someone who believed in doing things properly. It read, "To Mr. Ethan James Granger." He hadn't seen his full name written like that since his discharge papers. "You want privacy?" Gloria asked, halfway to flipping the closed sign. "I'll be fine." He slid a finger beneath the flap and unfolded the letter carefully, Marine's respected clean lines. "Dear Mr. Granger. Our records indicate you are the sole living nephew of the late Jeremiah L. Granger, resident of Maricopa County, Arizona. Pursuant to his last will and testament, you have been named beneficiary of certain real properties and livestock associated with a location known as Ironwood Ranch, 5 miles northwest of Redstone, Yavapai County. Please arrange to collect keys and execute transfer documents at your earliest convenience. Respectfully. Jonah Keats, ESQ, partner. A map was enclosed, drawn by a steady hand. An itemized list followed: house, barn, water rights, outbuildings, tools, all real enough to make him doubt it was. A brass key was taped to the last page, labeled neatly, "Main Gate, Ironwood." Gloria studied his face. "You look like a man who just got good news and doesn't trust it." Jeremiah Granger, Ethan murmured, tasting the name like dust on his tongue. It stirred faint memories, his father's voice mentioning an older brother who'd gone west and never came back. "I haven't heard that name since I was a kid." Gloria nodded. "Sometimes the past shows up right on time." Rex shifted, tail brushing the floor, as if he already knew something had changed. Ethan pocketed the letter and the key, his pulse steady but deep. For the first time in months, he didn't feel lost. He felt pointed somewhere. Tomorrow, he'd find that gate. The night settled over Redstone with a dry quiet that hummed between the hills. Ethan lay awake in the dim motel room, staring at the ceiling where the fan turned lazy circles. Beside the bed, Rex slept light, his chest rising and falling in even rhythm, one ear flicking at every distant sound, the hum of a passing truck, the soft clink of pipes cooling. The letter and the brass key sat on the nightstand, their presence almost too heavy for such a small room. He reached for Sarah's journal again, thumbing the worn pages. Her words looked back at him, patient and unhurried. "We don't get to choose how grief arrives," she had written once, "but sometimes we get to choose what it builds." Ethan pressed the page flat beneath his hand. "Guess we'll find out," he whispered. He packed before dawn, the careful ritual of a man who'd lived too long by necessity. A spare flannel, jeans, a small tin of boot grease, his father's pocketknife, a 2-day supply of Rex's kibble, and Sarah's journal wrapped in a bandana. Everything had a place, and he made sure each thing earned its weight. By the time first light cracked the horizon, the air had turned brittle. Frost dusted the edges of the gravel lot. Ethan stepped outside, cinching his jacket tighter as Rex circled once, stretching before falling into step. The morning came slow, filtered through a thin veil of desert haze that turned the mesas the color of old copper. Ethan borrowed a bay gelding from a neighbor of the Sundog, an older rancher named Clark Yates, a lean man with skin like saddle leather and eyes the color of worn denim. "She's stubborn," Clark said, patting the gelding's flank, "but steady on rough ground. Don't let her test you." Ethan nodded, accepting the reins. "Appreciate it." Rex watched with interest, tail swaying in restrained approval. The gelding snorted, uneasy at the sight of the big shepherd, but Ethan's calm voice smoothed the tension like a hand over water. They set out just as the sun cleared the ridge. The road north of Redstone narrowed from a cracked lane to a pair of dirt ruts climbing through scrub and juniper. The farther they went, the quieter the world became, no engines, no voices, just the scuff of hooves, the creak of saddle leather, and the slow breathing of the desert. Rex trotted close to the horse's left side, occasionally surging ahead to scout, then circling back to heel. His paws kicked up fine red dust that shimmered in the early light. The wind smelled of creosote and sage, sharp enough to make old memories sting. Ethan rode upright, scanning the horizon with the watchful discipline of a marine. Every rise, every shadow was measured, old instincts that didn't fade with discharge. His eyes traced the distant line of cliffs, the silver glint of dry creeks, the hawks riding thermals above them. After nearly an hour, the trail crested a small rise, and there it was, Ironwood Ranch. 2 weathered posts carved with horse heads stood on either side of a rusted archway. Between them hung a wrought iron gate heavy with scrollwork, horseshoes, and a web of corrosion. Once it had been painted white. Now it wore a coat of dust and time. Across the top, in letters eaten by rust, it read, Ironwood Ranch. Ethan reined the gelding to a halt. Rex froze beside him, muscles tense, ears pricked. The air felt different here, thicker somehow, charged with memory. Ethan dismounted, his boots crunching on dry gravel. He pulled the small brass key from his pocket and turned it over once in his palm. The metal was warm from his body heat, gleaming faintly. He fitted it into the gate's ancient lock. The mechanism resisted, grinding like bone, then gave with a groan. The chain fell slack. That's when Rex's growl started, low, cautious, rolling from deep in his chest. Ethan stilled. He knew that tone. It wasn't fear. It was alertness. He listened. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then, faintly, from somewhere beyond the fence, came a single bark. Sharp. Echoing. Then another. Then another still. Within seconds, the sound multiplied, dozens of voices rising, overlapping, answering each other until the entire valley seemed to vibrate with it. The gelding sidestepped, nostrils flaring. Ethan steadied her with a hand, eyes narrowing toward the source. Through the gaps in the ironwork, movement flickered. Shapes began to emerge. First a line of German shepherds, thin, rib-sharp, but standing proud. Their coats were dull but their eyes burned bright. Behind them, two massive Rottweilers, shoulder to shoulder, muscles taut but not aggressive, watching. Further back, flashes of gold caught the sun, retrievers, tails raised, barking high and quick. Then beagles, smaller but louder, baying like trumpets. Beyond them, collies moved ghost-like along the tree line, their coats tangled, their eyes cautious. It wasn't chaos. It was discipline on the edge of collapse. Ethan stood motionless. Even Rex had gone quiet now, though his hackles stood half-raised. Then, from within that living wall of fur and sound, an old golden retriever stepped forward. Her muzzle was white with age, her walk slow but sure. She moved with the kind of dignity that came from surviving too much. Her tail swayed once, then twice, measured, not frantic. She stopped a few feet short of the gate and lifted her head. Her gaze met Ethan's. Clouded but steady. Rex stiffened, poised on the line between protection and recognition. For a long breath, they stared at each other, the old golden and the younger shepherd, soldier to veteran, guardian to survivor. Then, slowly, Rex's posture eased. His tail brushed once against Ethan's leg, and the low growl in his chest faded to a sigh. Ethan reached out and pushed the gate open. It protested with a shriek, then swung wide. They stepped through together, man, dog, and horse, into a place that felt suspended between life and ruin. Inside, the earth was trampled with paw prints. The faint smell of fur, dust, and something wild filled the air. Yet it wasn't rot or decay. It was life, hard, worn, but still beating. Rex moved ahead, nose low, scanning. The golden retriever followed a few steps behind, her presence less a threat and more a watchman's approval. Ethan guided the gelding down the main path. To one side, a cluster of beagles bounded forward, tails wagging cautiously. On the other, a young shepherd pup peeked from behind a fallen trough, eyes wide with wonder and fear, paws too big for his frame. Further out, shapes lingered in the tall grass, mutts of every kind, lean but not lost. They kept their distance, watching. Waiting. Ethan took it all in, the faded barn, the sagging fence lines, the troughs scuffed smooth by thirsty mouths. The house beyond stood like a weary sentinel, 2 stories of sun-bleached wood and weathered shutters. Its porch leaned, but it still held. The air felt charged with silence, the kind that holds its breath before speaking again. Ethan dismounted and looped the gelding's reins over a post. The old golden approached now, slow but determined, stopping near Rex. The two touched noses briefly. Rex's tail brushed the dust once more. It wasn't friendship yet, but it was understanding. The barking had quieted to a murmur, a ripple of sound through the pack. Ethan let out the breath he'd been holding. He reached down, placing his hand on Rex's back. "It's all right," he said softly. The truth, though, was that it wasn't all right, not yet. But it could be. He looked around again at the broken fences, the still water troughs, the eyes watching from every corner. This wasn't abandonment. Not completely. Someone had tried to hold the line here, to keep these animals alive even when the world forgot them. Rex sniffed the ground, tail flicking once. The old golden gave a quiet whine, as if to agree. Ethan felt something stir in his chest, not hope exactly, but a kind of recognition. He had come looking for an inheritance. What he'd found was a promise that hadn't died. And whether he was ready or not, it was now his to keep. The first hour inside Ironwood Ranch passed in near silence. Ethan led the gelding down a rutted path while Rex scouted ahead, nose brushing the earth, tail low and alert. The morning sun climbed, burning away the thin mist that had hung in the valley. Everything looked at once abandoned and tended, like someone had been fighting a losing battle and refused to quit. Fences sagged but still held. The gates, though rusted, latched properly. Grass had grown long in the fields, but narrow paths were still worn through it, trails of paw prints that looked too deliberate to be chance. At the water trough beside the barn, a thin sheet of sunlight glimmered on the surface. It wasn't rainwater. It had been poured. The rim was worn smooth by countless muzzles. Ethan's pulse slowed as understanding crept in. Someone had cared for these dogs, maybe not well, maybe not recently, but enough to keep them alive. Rex trotted ahead, barking once, short and clipped, before darting toward a low lean-to behind the barn. Ethan followed, ducking beneath the sagging tin roof. The air smelled faintly of straw and animal musk, but there was something else, cedar, clean and dry. The bales were stacked neatly, tied with bright orange twine. Some were fresh enough to crack under pressure. Ethan brushed a hand over one, feeling its tightness. "Not old," he murmured. Rex sniffed, then padded toward the corner, tail wagging slightly. Whoever had been here hadn't left long ago. Outside, a soft chorus of barks drifted through the air. The dogs had spread out again, keeping their distance but circling closer, eyes bright, movements cautious. The old golden retriever still shadowed him, her pace slow, her tail swaying once for every few steps. Ethan crossed the yard, his boots stirring up red dust, and paused at a scatter of feeding pans near the porch. They were mismatched, rusted wash basins, dented buckets, a few aluminum trays. Each held faint traces of kibble crumbs and a slick residue of broth. He crouched, running his finger along the edge. Oily. Recent. He straightened, scanning the yard. "Someone's been keeping faith here," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone. The thought sat heavy in his chest. The red barn loomed ahead, its paint faded to rust, the boards weathered and split. Beyond it, tucked half-hidden by mesquite, stood a smaller structure. A shack, little more than 4 walls and a roof that slumped under its own years. The door hung crooked, secured by a rope knotted across the latch. Ethan led the gelding to a nearby post and tied her reins, then motioned to Rex. "Stay close." The shepherd padded beside him, muscles taut beneath his coat. The rope on the door was worn smooth with use, and the knot came undone easily. When Ethan pushed the door open, dust danced in shafts of sunlight that pierced through the cracks. The air inside carried a mix of cedar, sweat, and old leather. It was a man's space, spare, deliberate, built for living more than comfort. A narrow cot sat against the wall, its wool blanket folded military tight, though it now wore a thin layer of dust. Beside it stood a small wooden trunk, its lid carved faintly with initials worn by time. Ethan knelt, brushing his thumb across them. W.O. He lifted the lid. Inside lay the possessions of a life spent working under the desert sun. A pair of well-oiled boots rested on their sides, heels worn smooth from years in stirrups. A wide-brimmed hat lay beside them, sweat-stained and cracked. A flannel shirt, patched carefully at the elbows, folded with respect. And atop it all, a leather notebook, its edges curled, its spine darkened by handling. Ethan opened it. The first page was written in a hand both steady and unhurried. "I made a promise to Jeremiah Granger," it began. "And a promise is a chain you wear, even if no one remembers to look for it." The words pulled Ethan in. William Ortiz, the name carved on the trunk, had written his life across these pages. His story unfolded in simple sentences, practical but weighted with devotion. He had been born in New Mexico, son of shepherds, and came to Ironwood decades ago when Jeremiah Granger first dreamed of a ranch that valued life more than livestock. William's loyalty, he wrote, had never been bought, it had been earned. Jeremiah was half wild himself, but never cruel. The kind of man dogs follow without needing meat in his hand. The entries shifted from memories to records. He had chronicled deliveries of feed bought from his own wages when Jeremiah fell ill. Notes on mending troughs, hauling water, and treating a shepherd with a broken paw. She licked my hand after, one entry read. And I remembered why I stayed. Ethan turned the pages carefully. The handwriting grew shakier near the end. The final entry stopped him cold. My body's failing. I can't keep pace with their hunger. I promised Jeremiah I'd stay until his kin came. If you're reading this, then you are that kin. Forgive me for leaving. The dogs need stronger hands now. Ethan exhaled slowly, the weight of the notebook pressing against his chest. He pictured the man, older, worn, still tending the animals through exhaustion, keeping his word until he physically couldn't anymore. The shack felt full of him, his smell, his order, his quiet strength. Rex pawed at the floorboards near the cot, whining softly. Ethan frowned, crouching beside him. The shepherd nosed toward the shadows beneath the bed frame. Ethan reached under, his fingers brushing wood, then fabric. He pulled out a small crate, its lid slightly askew. From inside came a faint, fragile sound. Whimpering. He lifted the crate into the light. 3 puppies huddled inside, barely 8 weeks old. Their fur was thin, their ribs visible, their eyes wide and uncertain. One was a floppy-eared beagle, another a brindled mutt with a white blaze across its nose, and the third, a shepherd mix, his fur still downy soft. Rex lowered his head, sniffing gently. The pups trembled but didn't recoil. One reached out with a small paw, pressing against Rex's muzzle as if drawn to something familiar. Ethan's throat tightened. He could feel their tiny bodies shivering through the wood. He scooped one up, the little shepherd. It was light as air, bones fragile under his calloused hands. He thought of Sarah's handwriting, her words etched into memory, somewhere, there is no such thing as too late. He set the pup back down gently. The truth was heavy, simple, and absolute. The promise had been kept until the last caretaker could no longer stand. Now the burden had shifted, to him. Ethan tucked William's notebook into his jacket and retied the rope across the door, leaving the shack exactly as it had been, as though the man might still walk back through at any moment. He gestured to Rex, who lingered near the crate, unwilling to leave. Come on, boy. We'll figure it out. The sun hung lower now, turning the red dust to bronze. As Ethan led the gelding back toward the main yard, the golden retriever watched from the fence line, tail sweeping once across the dirt, a quiet approval. For the first time in nearly a year, Ethan felt something flicker beneath the weight of loss. Not joy, not yet hope, but belonging. A thread tying him to this land, these animals, this unfinished vow. He reached down to rest his hand on Rex's head. Looks like we found our orders, he said softly. Rex's tail thumped twice against his leg, the punctuation mark of agreement. Together, they walked back toward the house, the desert sun slipping behind the ridges, leaving Ironwood bathed in the amber of a new beginning that neither of them yet understood. The late afternoon light draped Ironwood Ranch in a weary gold, stretching shadows across the yard as Ethan approached the house. The building loomed ahead, 2 stories of faded clapboard and sun-blistered paint, its porch sagging but still intact. The windows reflected the light like tired eyes, and the front door bore the faint outline of where a brass knocker had once hung, now gone to rust. Ethan paused at the threshold. The air around the place felt charged, quiet, watchful, as though it was holding its breath, waiting to see if he would step inside. Rex brushed against his knee, tail lowered but not tucked, reading his hesitation and waiting for the signal. Let's have a look, Ethan murmured. He placed a steady hand on the door and pushed. The hinges groaned, spilling a gust of stale air laced with dust, cedar, and something faintly sweet, lavender maybe, long faded from linens. Inside, the light fell thin through grimy windows, illuminating a parlor draped in white sheets. Furniture sat like ghosts of their former shapes, chairs, a sofa, a sideboard, all covered, all still. A chandelier hung above, wrapped in cobwebs that trembled slightly as the doors settled shut behind them. The silence was thick but not empty. It was the kind that came from too many memories pressed into the walls. Ethan's boots creaked across the floorboards as he stepped deeper into the room. Dust floated around him like ash. On the fireplace mantel, beneath a veil of cobwebs, stood a row of photographs in tarnished frames. He reached out and picked one up carefully, blowing the dust from its glass. The picture inside was old, maybe from the 1930s or 40s, a family of 5 standing before the same house, back when its paint had still been white and proud. The father stood tall, broad-shouldered in a vest and tie, a neatly trimmed mustache giving him a look of earnest dignity. The mother beside him wore a plain cotton dress and a steady gaze. 3 children stood in front, 2 girls, one about 7 with ribbons in her hair, and a boy clinging shyly to his father's hand. They looked ordinary, proud, unaware that time would erase them from the land they stood on. Tucked behind the frame, a folded scrap of newspaper caught his attention. Ethan eased it free, careful not to tear the yellowed paper. The headline read, "Influenza Claims Hartwell Family." He skimmed the brief article beneath. James and Margaret Hartwell, along with their 3 children, succumbed to the winter epidemic of 1931. Survived by no immediate kin. Ethan set the frame back down slowly. The air seemed heavier now, as though the house itself was remembering them. "You did your best," he murmured to the empty room. Rex sniffed the air and patted ahead, claws clicking on the wood floor. He paused at the entrance to the dining room, waiting for Ethan to follow. The next room was large, the long table scarred with knife marks and time. Chairs sat neatly tucked beneath it, still in perfect alignment, as though waiting for a family meal that had never come. Blue china dishes were stacked at the far end, dulled by decades of dust. A single cup rested apart from the rest, its rim cracked. Ethan brushed his fingers across the tabletop. "Like they just stepped out," he said quietly. Beyond the dining room stretched a narrow hallway lined with doors. He opened the first, revealing a small study. Shelves sagged under the weight of books, their leather spines cracked and curling. Ledgers filled one corner, their labels faded, but the one lying open on the desk caught his eye. He recognized the handwriting immediately, the same strong, disciplined penmanship from William Ortiz's notebook. Jeremiah Granger's hand. The open page read like an entry rather than a ledger. "Dogs know the heart of a man. If they trust you, you cannot be false." Ethan traced the words with his thumb. They burned in him like a slow flame. He turned the next few pages. Jeremiah had kept meticulous records, not of cattle, but of dogs. Names, breeds, temperaments. Brutus, Rottweiler, firm but gentle. Lark, German Shepherd, loyal, quick, wary of strangers but soft with pups. Notes followed about feeding, training, and injuries tended. These weren't the accounts of a businessman. They were the field notes of a man who believed every life had worth. Ethan closed the ledger, staring at it for a long moment. "You saw them the same way she did," he whispered, thinking of Sarah. The next door down the hall opened into a bedroom. Dust sheets covered the bed, but he could still make out the delicate embroidery on a folded quilt at the foot. A faded Bible lay open on the nightstand, a dried flower pressed between its pages. Next to it sat a silver brush with strands of chestnut hair still caught in its teeth. He didn't touch anything. Some things didn't need disturbing. Back in the hallway, Rex lifted his head suddenly, ears rotating toward a sound outside, a faint shuffle, a soft chorus of whines. Ethan followed him to a side window. Outside, under the first hint of moonrise, he could see them, dozens of dogs moving across the yard, their bodies silvered by the light. Some lay near the barn, others circled the porch, quiet and patient. Ethan stepped out onto the porch. The boards creaked beneath his boots. The air had cooled, carrying the dry scent of juniper and dust. The desert sky stretched vast above, stars pricking through the indigo like tiny lanterns. Rex settled at his boots, resting his head against Ethan's knee. The pack gathered slowly. The old golden retriever appeared first, padding forward with unhurried dignity before curling near the porch steps. A handful of beagles came next, tails wagging softly as they nestled together in a warm, jumbled heap. 2 collies lay side by side, coats brushing. Even the Rottweilers, wary but calm, found places a few yards off, lying with their heads between their paws. It was as if some silent truce had been declared. The air vibrated with quiet breaths and the occasional soft sigh. Ethan leaned back against one of the porch posts, the desert stretching out before him like an ocean of shadow. He pulled William's notebook from his pocket and set it beside Sarah's journal on the step. One from the past, one from the heart, and both somehow leading him here. He looked down at Rex, whose eyes gleamed amber in the starlight. "We might be staying a while," he said. Rex's tail brushed the floor once. Agreement. The night deepened, and the desert seemed to exhale. The sound of the wind moved softly through the mesquite, carrying with it the low hum of crickets and the distant howl of a coyote too far to threaten. The dogs, one by one, sank into rest. Ethan's head tipped back against the post. For the first time in months, his muscles eased without command. Grief didn't vanish, it never would, but it had softened, traded sharpness for a strange calm. He watched the stars until his eyelids grew heavy. Sleep came quietly, the kind that didn't fight him. And as he drifted, surrounded by the slow, steady breathing of the pack, Ethan realized that for the first time since Sarah's death, he didn't feel alone. When morning came, it would ask what kind of man he meant to be. But tonight, under the Arizona sky, he had his answer. He was the one who stayed. The dawn crept softly over Ironwood Ranch, painting the mesas in slow shades of gold and rose. Ethan stirred on the porch, the stiffness of sleep easing from his shoulders as Rex stood beside him, already alert. The shepherd's posture was rigid, his gaze fixed toward the barn. "What is it?" Ethan asked, his voice still rough with sleep. Rex gave a low whine, then barked once, short, sharp, insistent. Ethan rose, brushing the dust from his jeans, and followed his dog's line of sight. 3 shapes lay just beyond the barn, apart from the others. They weren't moving. The moment Ethan saw the shallow rise and fall of their ribs, his pulse quickened. He crossed the yard fast, the morning chill biting at his breath. A mottled hound coughed weakly, each breath a painful rattle. Nearby, a young collie mix trembled, its eyes glassy, its fur damp around the mouth. A small beagle whimpered softly, pressing against the earth as if trying to disappear. Ethan knelt beside them, his hand moving from one to the next, feeling each heartbeat flutter beneath thin ribs. Fever. Dehydration. Something viral maybe. He didn't know, but he could recognize fragility when he saw it. "Easy," he murmured, steadying the collie's head. The dog's gaze found his, trusting, though its body was nearly spent. Rex paced behind him, whining, tail low, torn between urgency and helplessness. Ethan's throat tightened. He'd seen this kind of desperation before, different battlefield, same helpless feeling. Feeding, watering, patching wounds, he could do that. But illness? That had been Sarah's realm. He remembered her voice as clear as the desert wind, "You don't have to fix everything. Sometimes you just have to stay." He swallowed hard. Staying wasn't enough this time. These dogs needed real help. He looked back at Rex. "We're taking them to town." It took the better part of 20 minutes to rig a sling from an old canvas tarp and saddle straps. The gelding stood steady while Ethan lifted the sick collie across his lap, careful of the animal's labored breathing. The beagle and hound followed on weak legs, guided gently by Rex, who moved beside them like a silent escort. By the time Ethan swung into the saddle, the sun had cleared the ridges. The desert shimmered with heat already building for the day. The ride to Redstone was long and slow. Dust rose from the trail in small puffs beneath the gelding's hooves. The town was just waking when Ethan arrived, storefronts opening, children sweeping steps, the metallic clink of a blacksmith's hammer echoing through the morning. People stopped to stare. A man on horseback, a sick dog slung across his knees, two more trotting weakly beside him, it wasn't a sight they saw often. He ignored the whispers and steered toward a small brick building on the far end of town. The sign above the door read, Clare Morrison, veterinary surgeon. He'd heard her name once or twice, mentioned in passing by Gloria at the motel, but he'd never met her. Ethan dismounted carefully, sliding the collie into his arms and pushing through the door. A bell above it jingled, and the cool air inside hit his face like mercy. The space smelled of antiseptic and hay. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with jars, powders, and neatly labeled bottles. Behind a counter stood a tall, willowy woman in her 40s, sleeves rolled up, an apron strapped over a plain cotton shirt. Her gray-green eyes flicked up, alert but not startled. "Set him here," she said immediately, clearing the counter with one sweep of her arm. Her voice was calm, the kind that didn't rise even when urgency called for it. Ethan obeyed, laying the collie gently down. Clare Morrison moved with the precision of someone who had seen more emergencies than she cared to count. Her hands were long-fingered, confident, a little scarred, the kind of scars that come from teeth, claws, and persistence. Strands of iron-gray hair had escaped her bun, softening the severity of her profile. She leaned in close, checking the collie's gums, eyes, and chest, murmuring quietly as she worked. Respiratory infection. Dehydration. It's bad, but not beyond saving. She looked up, finally taking in the others, the hound, the beagle, Rex waiting in the doorway. All of them from the same place. Ranch north of here, Ethan said. Ironwood. There are more, dozens, maybe 100. Most seem healthy. These 3, aren't. Claire didn't blink at the number. She only nodded once. Bring them inside. For the next hour, Ethan watched her work. She moved from dog to dog, mixing powders, measuring water, administering injections, her hands steady as a heartbeat. She spoke to the animals softly, calling them sweetheart or good soul without breaking rhythm. Rex hovered at Ethan's side, his eyes tracking her every move. When Claire reached for him, offering a hand to sniff, Rex gave one slow blink and allowed it. "Fine shepherd," she said gently, scratching behind his ear. "You've been looking after them, haven't you?" Rex leaned into her touch for a brief second, then returned to his vigil. When the immediate crisis had passed, Claire wiped her hands on a towel and looked up at Ethan. "You're not a rancher." "Marine," he replied simply. "Retired." Her eyes softened. "That explains the stance. You carry yourself like someone who's had orders too long and doesn't know what to do without them." He gave a small, tired smile. "Inherited the ranch. My uncle. Found more dogs than cattle." "Ironwood," she repeated, recognition flickering in her eyes. "I'd heard of it. People said no one lived there anymore." "Someone did," Ethan said quietly. "Until he couldn't anymore. Left them behind with what little he had." Claire nodded slowly, thoughtful. Then she reached for a leather satchel and began filling it with supplies, bottles, syringes, rolls of gauze. "I'll come out with you." Ethan blinked. "You don't have to." "Of course I do." She met his gaze, firm but kind. "Those dogs need more than one visit. You need help. I know what that place asks of a person." He didn't argue. "Some offers carried authority you didn't refuse." By late afternoon, they were back on the trail. Claire rode a chestnut mare she'd tethered behind the clinic, her posture straight despite the jolting terrain. She rode like someone who had learned discipline early and never unlearned it. The ride was quiet for the first few miles, just the rhythmic clop of hooves, the creak of leather, the soft panting of Rex pacing alongside. Then Claire spoke. "How long have you been alone out there?" Ethan hesitated. A while. Your wife. He swallowed. Gone. A year now. Accident. Claire didn't offer sympathy, just a slow nod that felt like understanding. I lost my husband to pneumonia 10 years ago. Different loss, same hollow. The silence between them softened. Words weren't needed after that. When they reached Ironwood, the sun was low, spreading amber light across the ranch. Dogs began to bark as they approached, a mixture of alarm and curiosity. Rex trotted ahead, cutting through the noise like a soldier calming his unit. The pack quieted almost instantly. Claire stared, awe flickering across her face. Good heavens, there must be 200 of them. Ethan dismounted. 200 and counting. For hours, they worked side by side. Claire moved among the dogs with sure hands, examining each, treating small wounds, checking teeth and paws. She instructed Ethan in short, clear sentences, how to mix saline, how to check hydration by lifting the skin, how to soothe with voice more than touch. He learned quickly, his movements methodical, his silence steady. By the time the last light faded, the worst of the sick were resting comfortably in the barn. The rest of the pack had gathered quietly around the house, as though sensing relief. Ethan sat on the porch steps, exhausted but strangely light. Claire handed him a tin cup of water, then sat beside him, her long frame outlined by moonlight. You carry guilt, she said softly, not as a question, but as truth. Ethan stared into the cup. Couldn't save her. Sarah. Fever took her. And I, his voice faltered. I had hands trained to fight, not heal. Claire's gaze moved toward the sleeping dogs spread across the yard. Sometimes caring isn't about saving. It's about staying. You stayed for them. That counts. Her words settled deep, heavier than comfort but softer than grief. Ethan looked at her, then at Rex, whose head rested on his boot. The pack lay quiet, the night still except for the sound of their breathing. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt like the silence wasn't empty. It was full, of life, of promise, of something beginning again. The next morning rose cool and quiet over Ironwood, the desert sky streaked with faint silver before the sun took hold. Ethan was already awake, sitting on the porch steps with a mug of black coffee warming his hands. The smell of dust and sage carried on the breeze. Rex sat beside him, ears twitching at every distant sound, the groan of the barn roof, the shuffle of paws, the sigh of morning wind. For the first time since arriving, the place didn't feel hollow. It felt alive. Behind him, he heard the creak of a door. Claire stepped out, hair loosely tied, her sleeves rolled to her elbows. She held a notebook tucked under her arm and wore that same steady look she carried everywhere, the kind that refused to bend under fatigue. Morning, she said softly. Morning, Ethan replied, offering a faint smile. You're up early. So are you, she said, glancing at the yard where the dogs were beginning to stir, some stretching, others padding toward the troughs. They're hungry. I brought feed from the clinic, but we'll run out within a week. Ethan nodded. I'll make a supply run today. Claire tilted her head slightly. You ever run a ranch before? He smirked faintly. No. But I've run outposts in worse conditions. She laughed quietly, then knelt to scratch Rex's head. Then I suppose you'll manage. They spent the next few hours moving through the ranch in rhythm, feeding, watering, cleaning the troughs, sorting supplies. Claire worked with quiet precision, Ethan followed her lead, learning as he went. They found an old pump by the corral that still worked after some coaxing. Rusted bolts squealed as they turned, but water eventually flowed, a slow, steady trickle that sparkled in the light. By mid-morning, Ethan was soaked with sweat and dust, but the work steadied him. Every task had purpose. Every motion felt earned. When they stopped to rest, Claire pulled a small tin of jerky from her satchel and tossed a strip to Rex, who caught it midair with a satisfied chuff. She watched Ethan for a moment before speaking. "I looked through William Ortiz's old vet notes last night," she said. "He wasn't just feeding them. He was breeding certain lines, carefully. German Shepherds, Rottweilers, Retrievers. All registered at one time." Ethan frowned. "Why breed them out here?" "Because Jeremiah Granger believed dogs could be trained for rescue work instead of combat," Claire said, flipping through her notes. "He wanted Ironwood to be a refuge for service dogs, those abandoned after war or work. William continued that legacy. Until he couldn't." Ethan stared toward the barn, where a few shepherds were lying in the shade. "So they weren't strays?" "No," Claire said. "They were survivors." That word lingered. Survivors. It sounded like something more than description, it was a mirror. Later that afternoon, Ethan decided to explore the main house further. Claire had returned to tending a wounded collie, and the dogs dozed in the heat. Inside, the light filtered through torn curtains, laying stripes of gold across the dusty floor. He walked slowly from room to room, tracing the edges of furniture, the faded wallpaper, the hollow quiet that no longer unnerved him. When he reached the study again, his gaze fell to a section of the floor near the old desk. One board didn't quite sit flush, it lifted slightly at the corner. He crouched, pried at it with the edge of his knife, and felt it give. Beneath the plank, a small compartment revealed itself. Inside lay a steel box, dull and heavy with age. It bore a simple clasp and a small engraving, "For whoever stays." Ethan's pulse quickened as he lifted it out and set it on the desk. The lock clicked open easily, as though time had been waiting for him. Inside, he found a stack of envelopes, old but sealed, tied together with a strip of blue ribbon. Each was addressed in the same looping handwriting, "To Sarah Granger." For a moment, he couldn't breathe. He pulled the top envelope free and turned it over. The postmark was faint, 1993. His wife's maiden name before she ever met him. Hands trembling, Ethan opened it carefully. "Dearest Sarah. If you're reading this, then you found Ironwood the way your uncle hoped you would. This land doesn't belong to me anymore. It's waiting for someone who remembers what it stands for. The dogs here, they're not just animals. They're the promise Jeremiah made. Keep them safe, and they'll keep you whole. William Ortiz." He leaned back, stunned. The air seemed to still around him. Sarah had known about this place. She had been meant to come here long before fate took her elsewhere. Ethan thumbed through the rest of the letters. Some were from William, others from Sarah's mother, Rebecca Granger. They spoke of family ties to the land, of loss, of duty passed down like a flame, quiet, enduring, fragile. One final letter caught his eye. The handwriting was Sarah's. He opened it with shaking hands. "Ethan. If you ever find this, it means I didn't get the chance to tell you in person. My mother told me stories about Ironwood when I was a child. She said it was a place where kindness lived even after people left. I wanted to take you there one day, to show you something that still believes in good men. If you're reading this, then you found it before I could. Promise me one thing, don't leave it empty again. Love, Sarah." The paper blurred as his vision filled with tears. He closed his eyes, clutching the letter until it trembled in his hands. Rex whined softly beside him, resting his head on Ethan's knee. The warmth of that touch grounded him, pulled him back from the edge of grief. He took a long, steady breath and looked around the study. For the first time, he didn't see abandonment. He saw inheritance, not of money or land, but of purpose. When he stepped outside again, the world felt different. The air was bright and clean. Claire was standing by the trough, sleeves damp, her expression questioning when she saw his face. "You all right?" she asked. Ethan nodded slowly. "Better than I've been in a long time." He handed her the letter. She read silently, her eyes softening as she reached the end. She wanted you here, she said quietly. Seems like this place was waiting for you both. Ethan's voice came rough but sure. Then I'll do what she asked. I won't leave it empty again. That evening, he began rebuilding. He started with the fences, driving new posts from salvaged timber found in the shed. The rhythmic crack of the hammer echoed across the fields, steady as a heartbeat. Claire joined in, rolling fresh wire while Rex supervised from the grass, tail wagging every few swings. As the sun dipped below the horizon, turning the desert red, the dogs gathered by the gate, watching, waiting, as if understanding the work's meaning. When Ethan set the last post, he stood back, sweat streaking the dust on his face. He looked out across the land, the corrals, the barn, the field stretching into shadow, and felt something click into place. Not completion. Continuation. Rex barked once, sharp and bright, breaking the silence. Ethan laughed, low and full. Yeah, boy, he said. We're just getting started. Claire leaned against the fence, smiling faintly. You've got yourself a new platoon. Ethan nodded, gaze fixed on the horizon. Maybe this time, I can keep them all safe. The last of the light faded, leaving the world wrapped in cool indigo. The stars came one by one, slow and sure. And for the first time in a year, Ethan Granger felt whole, not because the past had healed, but because he had finally found where it belonged. The next few days fell into rhythm, work, dust and purpose threading each hour together like beads on a worn string. Ethan woke before dawn, the sound of distant barking his new reveille. The dogs had settled into order, moving almost by instinct. The German shepherds watched the perimeter, the retrievers patrolled the yard, and the smaller breeds lingered near the house, quick to bark at anything that shifted in the wind. Claire had taken over one of the smaller rooms in the house as a makeshift clinic. Shelves lined with bottles and gauze now filled what had once been a pantry. A faint scent of alcohol and lavender drifted through the air, clean, purposeful. Ethan had transformed the barn's loft into storage space, stacked with feed bags, tools, and old veterinary supplies salvaged from William Ortiz's notes. The ranch was coming back to life piece by piece, like a long silent song finding its melody again. But the desert didn't stay kind for long. On the 5th day, the air shifted. A storm was coming, the kind that didn't just sweep through but changed everything it touched. It began with stillness. The wind dropped. The sky thickened, heavy and swollen with ash-gray clouds. Even the dogs felt it. Their movements turned uneasy, their barks sharper, shorter. Claire stepped out of the clinic, wiping her hands on a towel. Her eyes flicked toward the horizon, where dark clouds rolled low over the mesa like a slow tide. Monsoon front, she said. They're early this year. Ethan followed her gaze. The air already smelled of rain, metallic and wild. How bad? Bad enough, she said simply. We need to get everyone under cover. They moved fast. Ethan opened the barn doors while Claire herded the first wave of dogs inside. Rex barked commands that somehow worked better than human shouts, sharp, deliberate sounds that cut through the chaos. The pack responded like soldiers, grouping together, following his lead. Thunder cracked, deep and rolling, shaking dust from the rafters. The sky opened just as Ethan shoved the last gate closed, the first sheets of rain slamming down in torrents. Within minutes, the ground turned to mud, swallowing footprints whole. The barn filled with the sounds of panting and fear, nervous whines, claws scraping against wood, tails thudding against hay. Ethan moved among them, voice steady and low. Easy now. You're all right. We're all right. Lightning flashed through the slats, illuminating faces, some wide-eyed, some calm, all watching him. Claire worked at the far end, checking the younger and weaker dogs, her hair soaked, her hands moving with calm determination. When the wind howled against the barn doors, Ethan braced them with a timber beam and looked to her. You think it'll hold? It'll have to, she said, her voice raised over the roar. We can't move them now. The next strike of lightning split a tree near the fence line. The cracks sounded like a rifle shot. Several dogs barked wildly, panic spreading through the herd. Ethan stepped into the center of it, shouting over the noise, firm and commanding. "Rex! Settle them!" Rex obeyed instantly, darting through the chaos, barking short, clipped tones that snapped the pack's attention back to order. Slowly, the barking eased, replaced by heavy breathing and the rhythmic drum of rain. Ethan exhaled. Good boy. Hours passed. The storm refused to move on. Water leaked through the roof in thin rivulets that pooled on the dirt floor. The air smelled of wet hay and lightning. Ethan's shirt clung to his back, soaked through, but he didn't move from his post by the door. Clare crossed to him once, offering a small tin of coffee. Her hand trembled slightly from exhaustion. "Drink this," she said. He took it with a nod. "You always this calm in a storm?" She smiled faintly. "You learn to be. Fear doesn't help patch holes." They stood together for a long time, watching the flashes paint the desert silver. Between strikes, the darkness pressed thick and close. Then, amid the howl of wind and thunder, Rex stiffened. His ears pricked, head turning sharply toward the east side of the barn. He barked once, low and urgent. Ethan's body went still. He knew that tone. Not fear. Warning. He grabbed a lantern, shielding the flame as he moved toward the side wall. Water dripped from a crack in the boards, but beyond that came another sound, a faint, muffled whimper. "Clare," he called quietly. "Over here." She joined him, crouching close as he held the lantern up. The light revealed movement outside the wall, small shapes pressed against the boards, trembling. "Puppies," Clare breathed. "They must have been trapped under the porch." Without hesitation, Ethan shoved the barn door open just enough for Rex to slip through. "Find them," he ordered. Rex darted into the rain, vanishing into the downpour. Lightning flashed, and for a moment, Ethan saw him leap over a puddle, heading for the collapsed porch near the main house. "Be careful," Clare muttered, though the words were for the dog. A minute later, Rex reappeared, mud-covered, teeth gripping the scruff of a tiny pup. Ethan took the trembling bundle, wrapping it in his jacket before sending Rex back again. 2 more trips followed, each time bringing another soaked, shivering life from the wreckage. By the time the last puppy was safe inside, the rain had begun to fade. The thunder rolled north, the storm's voice softening into distance. Ethan closed the barn doors fully and turned to see Clare cradling the smallest pup against her chest. It blinked up at her weakly, then nestled closer. "You're a brave one," she whispered. Ethan smiled, breathless and drenched. "All of them are." The silence that followed was almost startling. Only the steady drip of water broke it. The dogs had calmed, most lying quietly in the hay, their breathing slow and even. When the first pale streaks of dawn touched the horizon, Ethan stepped outside. The world was washed clean, muddy, broken in places, but alive. The desert smelled sharp and new. Clare joined him, the rescued pups bundled in an old blanket. "Storms passed," she said softly. He nodded. "And we're still standing." They walked the perimeter together, surveying the damage. A few fence posts had splintered, one trough overturned, part of the porch collapsed, but nothing that couldn't be rebuilt. The dogs followed in small clusters, tails wagging cautiously, sniffing at the wet earth. Ethan turned toward Clare, voice steady despite the fatigue lining it. "Thank you." She shook her head. "Don't thank me. Thank that shepherd of yours. He saved them." Ethan looked down at Rex, who sat proudly at his side, fur caked in mud, eyes bright with purpose. "He's got more heart than most men I've served with." Rex gave a single bark as if in agreement, tail thumping once against Ethan's leg. They stood there a while longer, watching the morning rise. The sky was clear again, a wide stretch of blue unmarred by storm or shadow. Claire's voice broke the quiet. You know, she said, most people would have left when the rain came. You didn't. Ethan gazed out across the shining fields, his hand resting on Rex's head. Leaving's easy, he said quietly. Staying, that's the hard part. The dogs began to bark again, not in fear this time but in greeting, as the sun climbed higher and the land warmed under its light. Ironwood had weathered another test, and so had the man who now called it home. And though neither said it aloud, both knew something had changed, not just in the land, but between them. In the silence that followed, Claire smiled faintly, the kind that didn't need words. Ethan returned it, small but sure. For the first time, the desert didn't look empty. It looked like promise. The days after the storm brought a stillness that felt earned. The desert glowed bright again, scrub and sand washed clean, the air crisp and sharp as glass. Ironwood had endured. The fences held, the barn stood, and the pack, mud-streaked, weary, but unbroken, moved through the yard as if they knew victory when they smelled it. Ethan worked quietly, repairing what the wind had torn down. The collapsed porch came first. He replaced the warped boards with timber salvaged from the shed, hammer ringing steady against the morning calm. Each strike echoed through the valley, sharp and alive. Rex sat nearby, watching every movement with patient interest, tail sweeping through the dust in lazy rhythm. Claire was on the porch steps, wrapping the smallest of the storm-rescued pups in a clean towel. They're strong, she said, glancing up as Ethan passed. Stronger than they look. Like their handler, Ethan replied with a faint smile. She smirked without looking up. Flattery before lunch. Careful, Marine. You'll ruin your reputation. The banter came easily now, the way comfort does when people start to trust the silence between them. By afternoon, the house stood whole again, patched but proud. The golden retriever, the quiet matriarch of the pack, inspected the new boards with the seriousness of a foreman. When she finally lay down, satisfied, Ethan felt something inside him settle. As the sun reached its height, Claire approached with her notebook tucked under her arm. Ethan, she said, I've been thinking. That sounds dangerous, he said lightly, wiping sweat from his brow. Listen, she said, ignoring the quip. This place, it's more than a ranch. It's a refuge. But you can't do this alone. You'll need resources, food, medicine. We could register Ironwood as an official rescue. Ethan paused mid-motion, turning toward her. A rescue? She nodded. I can handle the veterinary side. You handle operations. We'll file with the state, apply for non-profit status. With the number of dogs here, it's the only way to sustain it long-term. He frowned thoughtfully. Means people start showing up. Strangers. Yes, Claire admitted. But it also means help. Donations. Volunteers. The dogs deserve more than survival, Ethan. They deserve a future. He didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted toward the distant horizon, where the desert stretched endless and quiet. He had spent years avoiding the world, its noise, its demands. But now, the thought of reopening Ironwood didn't feel like surrender. It felt like continuation. Finally, he nodded. All right. Let's make it official. Claire smiled, the kind of smile that didn't just reach the mouth, it settled in the eyes. Then we'd better start with a name. He raised a brow. Ironwood Ranch Rescue not catchy enough for you? Too formal, she said. We need something that carries heart. Ethan thought for a moment, glancing toward Rex, who was now lying among a cluster of puppies, letting them climb over his broad back. What about Sanctuary? He said quietly. Ironwood Sanctuary. Claire's gaze softened. That's perfect. The next week became a blur of preparation. Ethan cleared out the old office and turned it into a registration room. Claire brought in forms, folders, and a clunky laptop powered by a portable generator. The dogs learned to stay clear of the humming machine after one brave beagle's nose had triggered the power button mid-application. Each night, they sat at the kitchen table, filling forms by lamplight. Papers scattered across the wood surface, medical histories, intake logs, vaccination records. Ethan looked over one form, brow furrowed. Occupation. Claire smirked. Put, caretaker. It suits you better than Marine. He grunted but wrote it down. By the third night, exhaustion had turned to laughter. Claire read aloud the name suggestions for the website domain, ironwolf.com, pause-of-promise.org, second chance Ironwood. Ethan vetoed each one until she swatted him with a folder. You're impossible, she said. I'm thorough, he corrected. Same thing, she replied, but there was warmth behind the words. As they worked, a sense of community began to spread, not just between them, but through the pack itself. The younger dogs started to mimic Rex's calm discipline. The older ones watched over the pups with quiet authority. Even the timid beagle that had nearly drowned during the storm now ventured from its hiding spot, following Claire wherever she went. The transformation was slow but undeniable. The ranch, once a graveyard of silence, now pulsed with life. Then came the day the outside world found them. It started with a distant rumble, not thunder this time, but the low growl of an approaching vehicle. The sound sent a ripple of unease through the dogs. They rose, barking, tails stiff. Ethan stepped onto the porch, squinting into the sun. A dusty pickup was making its way up the dirt road, tires crunching over gravel. The driver cut the engine and stepped out, a young man in jeans and a sun-faded shirt, holding a clipboard. Afternoon, the stranger called. Name's Kyle Denton. I'm with Arizona Rescue Registry. You must be the folks starting the Ironwood Sanctuary. Claire joined Ethan, brushing dust from her hands. That's right. I'm Dr. Morrison, and this is Ethan Granger. Kyle smiled, a little starstruck. Granger, huh? You related to Jeremiah Granger? The rescue legend? Ethan hesitated, caught off guard. He was my uncle. Kyle let out a low whistle. Well, I'll be. Folks still tell stories about him at the shelter conventions. Said he once trained a half-wild shepherd to find lost kids in the desert. Ethan glanced down at Rex, whose ears perked up like he understood every word. Guess it runs in the family. Kyle chuckled and got to work, touring the property, snapping photos for the registry. The dogs followed at a polite distance, curious but wary. When the paperwork was done, he handed Claire a stamped document. Congratulations. You're official now. Ethan took it, reading the bold print, Ironwood Sanctuary, Registered Nonprofit Rescue. For a long moment, he just stared at the words. Then he looked at Claire. We did it. She nodded, her eyes bright in the afternoon light. No, Ethan. You did it. You brought it back. That evening, the ranch glowed under lantern light. The dogs lay scattered across the yard, their bodies warm and content. The storm's wreckage was a memory now, replaced by the soft rhythm of breathing and the occasional bark into the open sky. Ethan sat on the porch, the registration paper folded in his pocket. Claire joined him with 2 mugs of coffee, handing him one without a word. He looked out at the horizon, where the stars had begun to emerge. Feels strange, he said. Letting the world in again. Claire sipped her drink. It's not letting them in. It's letting the right ones find you. Ethan nodded, watching Rex chase a moth across the yard, his tail a streak of silver in the moonlight. Ironwood's got a heartbeat again, he murmured. Claire smiled. And so do you. He didn't answer, but the quiet between them said enough. For the first time, the ranch no longer felt like a grave of old promises. It felt like what Sarah had written about, a place that still believed in good men. And under that vast desert sky, Ethan realized he'd finally become one of them. The heat of midsummer came early to Ironwood. Days stretched long and heavy, the air wavering above the sand like liquid glass. Yet even in that sweltering stillness, the ranch thrived. The dogs were leaner now, stronger, their coats bright beneath the relentless sun. Ironwood Sanctuary had grown into what Sarah once dreamed, a place that pulsed with purpose. Ethan kept the routines tight. Morning feedings, perimeter checks, training drills. Clare handled records, medicine, and the steady stream of letters and calls from shelters across Arizona. Word had spread fast, Ironwood was taking in rescues from every corner of the state. But with recognition came attention. On a Thursday afternoon, a dusty sheriff's truck pulled up the drive. The sight of it tightened Ethan's chest, old instincts rising before thought. Sheriff Nolan stepped out, a man carved from years of heat and hard choices. He removed his hat and nodded. "Granger," he said. "Heard about what you're doing out here. Mighty fine work." Ethan returned the nod cautiously. "Appreciate that, Sheriff. What brings you by?" Nolan's eyes shifted, scanning the open land, the dogs lying in the shade, Rex standing watch by the porch. "We've got trouble up north. 10-year-old girl went missing yesterday. Camping with her folks near the cliffs. Search teams we've been out all night, no luck." Ethan's stomach sank. "You think she's still in the canyon?" Nolan sighed, pulling off his sunglasses. "That's what we're praying. We're short on tracking dogs. Someone in town said you've got trained shepherds here. I wouldn't ask if it weren't desperate." Claire appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a towel. "How long's she been gone?" "About 18 hours, Nolan said. Temps dropped into the 40s last night. She's got no coat, no food." Ethan looked down at Rex, who stood poised, ears pricked. The decision wasn't even a decision. "We'll come." Within minutes, the truck was loaded. Claire packed a field kit, bandages, antiseptic, and water. Ethan leashed Rex, then whistled for two others, Lark, a shepherd mix with a keen nose, and Brutus, the Rottweiler with quiet strength. The dogs fell into formation like soldiers reporting for duty. They rode north in the sheriff's truck, the desert unfurling in endless ribbons of gold and red. Dust plumed behind them. No one spoke for the first 30 miles. The air carried too much weight. When they reached the canyon rim, the world opened into a vast expanse of rock and shadow. The cliffs dropped sharply into the basin below, rugged, unforgiving. Deputies moved through the brush, radios crackling, voices tight with fatigue. "Parents are down there," Nolan said, pointing toward the search tents below. "They've been walking since dawn. Nothing yet." Ethan crouched beside Rex, unhooking his leash. "You know what to do, boy. Find her." Rex sniffed the air, catching the faint scent carried on the canyon wind. His ears twitched, and his gaze fixed east. Then he barked once, sharp, decisive, and bounded down the trail. "Follow him!" Ethan shouted. They moved fast, the sheriff and two deputies trailing behind. Lark darted ahead, nose low, tail rigid, while Brutus stayed close to Ethan's side, steady and silent. The canyon narrowed into a rocky pass. Scrub and mesquite clawed at their clothes. Every sound seemed too loud, the crunch of gravel, the pant of breath. Then Rex barked again, more insistent this time. Ethan quickened his pace, rounding a bend, and froze. A small shoe lay half buried in the dirt. Pink canvas. Torn lace. "Over here," he shouted, waving to the sheriff. Rex circled the area, nose to the ground, tail cutting through the air in quick arcs. He caught the trail and bolted east, disappearing behind a jagged ridge. Ethan followed, lungs burning, boots scraping the stone. They found her half a mile deeper in the canyon, wedged in the crook of a boulder, half conscious, lips cracked with dehydration. She was small, blonde, her face streaked with dust and tears. Rex reached her first, whining softly as he nosed her arm. The girls stirred faintly, whispering something too faint to catch. Ethan dropped to his knees beside her, heart pounding. "Hey, sweetheart," he said gently. "You're safe now. We've got you." He gave a quick nod to Clare, who was already uncapping a water bottle and wetting a cloth. She dabbed it over the girl's mouth, coaxing small sips. The child blinked, her gaze catching on Rex. "Doggy," she murmured. Ethan smiled despite the tightness in his throat. "Yeah. He's been looking for you." It took 2 hours to bring her back to the surface. Deputies cleared a path, hands steady, voices low. The girl's parents ran to meet her, collapsing in relief as they took her from Ethan's arms. Her mother wept into his shoulder, words tumbling out between sobs, thank you, over and over. Ethan stepped back, letting them have the moment. He turned to Rex, who sat a few feet away, chest heaving but eyes calm. Ethan knelt, pressing his forehead to the shepherd's. "Good work, soldier." Rex licked his chin once, tail thumping the dirt. By sunset, the story had already spread. News vans crowded the edge of the road by the time the team returned. Microphones, cameras, voices shouting questions, it all came too fast, too loud. "Mr. Granger. Is it true your dog led the search? Are you reopening your uncle's legacy? Can we film the sanctuary?" Ethan stood still, blinking against the glare of camera lights. He hadn't asked for attention, and part of him recoiled from it. But then he saw Clare standing beside him, calm and unflinching. "They want to know," she whispered. "Let them." He nodded slowly, stepping forward. "Ironwood Sanctuary isn't about one dog," he said, his voice carrying steady and low. "It's about giving second chances, to them, and maybe to people like me. Rex just reminded us what they're capable of when someone believes in them." The reporters scribbled furiously, their lenses flashing. By the time the sun disappeared behind the mesas, the media vans had gone, and quiet returned. The world beyond Ironwood might buzz for weeks about the rescue, but here, under the widening stars, the desert was still. Ethan walked through the yard, every step echoing softly against the hard earth. The dogs lifted their heads as he passed, tails wagging, eyes bright. When he reached the porch, Clare was waiting with 2 mugs of coffee. "You handled that well," she said. "I just told the truth," he replied. "Funny thing about the truth," she said, handing him a mug. "It always sounds like hope when it comes from the right person." He took a sip, staring at the horizon where the last glow of daylight lingered. "The world's going to come knocking now." "Then let it," she said. "Ironwood can take it." He glanced down at Rex, now dozing near the steps, paws twitching in dreams. "Yeah," he said softly. "We can take it." And as the desert night closed around them, filled with the slow hum of crickets and the quiet breathing of 100 rescued souls, Ethan realized something Sarah had once written was true: some places weren't meant to be found. They were meant to find you. The desert dawn came softly that morning, quiet as breath. Pale gold light spilled over the mesas, tracing the fences, the barn roof, the sleeping shapes of dogs sprawled in the dust. The air carried that cool clarity that only comes after long storms and hard seasons, peace earned, not given. Ethan stood by the porch rail, mug of coffee warming his hands, watching the sun crawl up over Ironwood. Rex sat beside him, fur catching the early light like bronze. The world around them was still, alive, patient, waiting for another day to begin. He'd been standing in that same spot every morning for weeks now, since the rescue. The story of the lost girl had spread far and wide. Letters arrived almost daily, handwritten notes, donations, photos of dogs adopted in honor of Rex. Volunteers began showing up from neighboring towns, sometimes just to help mend fences or haul feed. Ironwood Sanctuary had become something larger than either of them expected. Clare stepped out of the house, her hair tousled from sleep, a folder tucked under one arm. "Morning, Marine," she said softly, her voice warm against the quiet. Ethan smiled faintly. Morning, document. She handed him the folder. Applications. People who want to adopt some of the dogs. I think it's time. He thumbed through the pages. Each photo showed a smiling family, a fenced yard, a caption written in hopeful ink. You sure we're ready? They are, she said, nodding toward the yard where the pack stretched and yawned. You taught them how to trust again. Now they get to teach someone else. Ethan's gaze lingered on the dogs, Lark, proud and watchful, Brutus, sprawled in the dust like a lazy sentinel, the golden retriever matriarch, her muzzle silver with age, and the pups, now bold and bounding through the tall grass. The idea of letting them go twisted something inside him, but he knew Clare was right. Rex nudged his leg gently, as if echoing the truth. All right, Ethan said quietly. Let's start today. The first family arrived by noon, a young couple from Tucson with 2 children, a boy and a girl. They knelt in the yard while a gentle retriever named Daisy approached, tail wagging in cautious rhythm. Within minutes, the children were laughing, Daisy's head resting in the boy's lap as though she'd always belonged there. Ethan watched from the porch, arms crossed, heart heavy but full. Clare joined him, handing him a clipboard. You're allowed to smile, you know. I'm smiling on the inside, he said dryly. She laughed. Sure you are. By sunset, 3 dogs had gone to new homes. Each departure left a quiet space in the yard, a gap that filled with both pride and ache. That evening, Ethan sat by the fire pit, the flames painting warm light across his face. Clare joined him, a blanket draped around her shoulders. The desert stretched beyond them, a dark ocean of silence broken only by the occasional bark from the barn. You ever think about leaving? She asked after a while. Ethan stared into the fire. I did. Once. And now. He poked at the embers with a stick, watching sparks spiral upward. Now I think this is where I'm supposed to be. Sarah wanted me to find Ironwood. Took me a while to realize why. Claire's eyes softened. Because you needed saving too. He nodded slowly. Guess so. The night deepened, stars spilling across the sky like scattered glass. The quiet between them wasn't lonely, it was steady, full of the kind of peace that doesn't need words. After a while, Clare reached into her coat and handed him a small envelope. Found this in the mail today. Thought you'd want to open it yourself. Ethan frowned, taking it carefully. The handwriting stopped his breath, it was unmistakable. His own name written in Sarah's hand. He turned the envelope over, feeling the raised edges of the ink. How? Clare shrugged softly. Postmarked nearly 2 years ago. Must have been delayed, maybe stuck in one of those old forwarding systems. It found its way here eventually. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, her handwriting graceful and strong as ever. Ethan. If you ever find this place, it means you found where I always hoped you would end up. Ironwood isn't just land, it's legacy. It's the part of our family that believed goodness doesn't die, it just waits. I wanted to show it to you, but maybe it was meant to show itself. Promise me something. Don't keep your heart buried like you did after the war. Let it breathe. Let it belong to something again, even if that something has 4 legs and fur. I love you. Always will. Sarah. Ethan sat there for a long time, the letter trembling slightly in his hands. The fire popped softly, and the desert wind moved through the grass, whispering around them like a voice remembering how to speak. Clare reached over and placed her hand on his. No words. Just warmth. Just presence. He looked up at her, eyes shining in the firelight. She always knew how to find the right words. She found the right man too, Clare said softly. He smiled then, small but real. I think she'd like what we've done here. She'd be proud, Clare said. Of you. Of Rex. Of all of it. They sat in silence again, watching the flames burn low. Later, after Clare had gone inside, Ethan walked the perimeter one last time. The dogs followed lazily, padding along behind him in the moonlight. The fences gleamed silver, the air cool and still. At the far edge of the property stood the old ironwood sign, its letters rusted but strong. He stopped there, looking out at the vast, endless land beyond. The stars stretched wider than any horizon, and for the first time in years, the weight in his chest felt lighter. He crouched beside Rex, running a hand over the shepherd's thick coat. "You did good, partner," he said softly. "You gave them all a home." Rex pressed his head against Ethan's arm, eyes half closed, tail brushing the dirt. Ethan looked up at the night sky one last time, the wind moving gently across the land. "Sarah," he whispered, "I kept my promise." The desert answered in silence, soft, infinite, alive. When morning came again, Ironwood would wake with the same quiet rhythm, the dogs, the fences, the land breathing as one. New families would come, new lives would begin, and somewhere, beyond the horizon, hope would keep walking back toward home. Because Ironwood wasn't just a sanctuary for animals. It was a sanctuary for everyone who had ever been lost, and found again.